Welcome to another episode of the Pastor's Call podcast. I'm your host, Joel Webb. Before we begin today's episode, I want to thank the sponsor for the show. It's Blue Water Free Methodist Church, where I have the pleasure of serving. We're an intentional community reflecting Jesus to our world. As well, this podcast is produced and edited by Refresh Digital Services. Well, today I'm so happy and thankful to have joining me a really good friend of mine, a brother that I really appreciate so much, Ken Patriquin. He has years and years of ministry experience under his belt in various roles, but as well has a focus, especially for the last couple decades, relating to counseling as well. So really excited to get into today. So thank you so much for joining me, Ken.
Sure. This is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
I've not done a lot of these.
Well, no time like the present. So
Right.
would love for you just to start by sharing a little bit of who you are, your background, and what you felt your call into ministry was.
Okay, so should I start when I was 5? No.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up a New Englander. I've grown up in New England most of my life until I was in high school. Mm-hmm. Then I went off. Then the furthest west I ever lived was in Syracuse, New York, until I came to Michigan when I was in my 30s. So that's how that is. And so I I started out, I was not a believer until I was 18 years old. I was in a Protestant church, and we were good people, and we did nice things, and I thought I was a Christian until one day during the Jesus Revolution time. I was born in 1954, so it was in the 60s, 70s, and I was at my cousin's house. We went to a Bible study, and it was a typical 60s one where you're down in the basement and it's kind of dark in the basement, and you have a guitar and you're playing, and the guy said, "Do you want to ask Jesus in your life?" And I remember that moment. This is interesting. That moment, I thought, I can't do that. I'd embarrass. My cousin was there, so I'd embarrass my cousin, and she invited me here, and I don't know, and I'm a believer, or I don't, and I was so I talked myself out of it. And so then I go to shake the hands with the guy, and it just came out. It's like, I want to ask Jesus in my life. Then he did the thing they used to do years ago. He hollered up the stairs and said, "Ken wants to become a Christian." So everybody came downstairs screaming and hollering and yelling. I'm going, what did I do? What did I do? But it's interesting because after that, I knew that there was a difference. Because before I was doing, quote, religious things, reading the Bible and youth group and all that stuff. And then now it was different. It now felt different because now I look at it now. It's because I had a personal relationship with all of this instead of just doing it because you do it on Sunday.
Yeah.
So that's it. What else do you need?
Yeah, and
to say
just when it's kind of through this process, what you felt your call towards ministry as a whole was.
So what happened was, when I was going through school, I wasn't really good educationally. I graduated, I think, with a C- from high school. So the first thing I thought of is our family was always the big thing on college. So I went to a community college for the only thing I liked, which was art. So I did graphic arts. So I have an associate's degree in graphic design. Well, about the time just before I went into my associate's college, I became a Christian. I was 18 years old, became a Christian. So I went there without any discipling, I just went right from that to school. And so I remember, the only thing I remember then, the 2 years I went, was God, I remember this one prayer. It's, "God, when I get out of here," it's almost like jail. "When I get out of here, I need to get to know some Christians." I got out of there. Yeah. And what happened was I met everybody I met was a Christian. So it's just, God was inundating me with Christians. So what happens was I started living in a house with 4 other guys who are new to the Lord too. So we're just kind of this, I call it God's discipleship home. That was a time where we were all working. It's typical young people in their 20s, and you're working, and you're a Christian. You're all excited, and you do the thing where you come home from work at 5, you eat, and then you talk about the Bible and what happened. and what went on, go to bed at 2 o'clock, get up at 4 o'clock to go to, and so did that for months. And so that was it was one of those times that were just real exciting. So that's when God started to grab my heart, because I had never really I only had a religious experience before. So there's that. And then I I had this passion to work with youth in the church. So I started that, didn't know much about it, just kind of went in and had some interesting experiences and thought, I need to learn more about this. So that's when I got my bachelor's degree from Barrington College. It's not around anymore, merged with Gordon College. It was a Christian liberal arts college. And so they started with a youth ministry program. And the year that they started, the June of the year that they started the youth ministry program, I was at my church and talking about I wanted to go into youth ministry. At that time they didn't have youth ministry curriculum, and this guy came over and said, "Well, my college is starting that in September." And I said, "Well, okay, that's great." And he said, "You should apply." I'm going, "Really? It's not going to happen." It did. God just worked it out. So I went there, got my bachelor's degree in youth ministry, worked for 4 or 5 years in different churches around. And that's when I ended up going to Syracuse, and I worked in Syracuse, New York as a youth director. And then things happened there where I was kind of let go of the youth ministry position there, not because I did anything wrong. It was just they were ending up needing an associate pastor, and I didn't have that. I had a degree in youth ministry. So then I talked to the only guy I knew who knew all the churches around, which was Clarence Jordan, who was from the Syracuse Rescue Mission. And he said, "As a matter of fact, I could use you." And I'm going, "I've never worked with an alcoholic. I don't even think I remember seeing an alcoholic before." And it's like, what am I going to do? And I said, "Well, I guess, okay."
Yeah.
"Clarence, you want to use me?" It's like, okay. So I came on, I think it was about 23 or 24 years old, as the building supervisor. I did not know what that position was. And what that position is, I was single, so I was living in the middle of the second floor of the building in a little efficiency apartment. And they told me after about 2 weeks of being there, said, "By the way, you have all the authority of Clarence Jordan from 5:30 at night to 8 o'clock in the morning." And I'm going, "Excuse me, what you say to me?" It's like, you mean I'm in charge of this whole place? It had sobering up, extended sobering up, people, everybody was older than me pretty much. Even they had a medics department, and the medics department was older than me. It's like, oh my. So that was an experience. And through all of this, like with the youth, I was learning things about myself and about what was going on. I remember when I got done with the youth ministry and came on at the mission, I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, God has really taught me how to love the inner city," because it was in the middle of the inner city in Syracuse. So the first alcoholic I met that had to blow in the breathalyzer machine and all that, and was cussing and nasty, and just, he was terrible. I mean, he was just nasty to everybody. And I was getting mad, and he was calling me names, and it's like, oh, that's driving me crazy, And I remember walking away from that, and God said, "Well, you love everybody." And I went, "Oh, okay." And so that's when at the rescue mission, God really was teaching me how to truly care for people that were down and out and just a mess. And so that's kind of where I think God started kind of training my spiritual heart. Because when we become Christians, your heart is awakened, and then it's like you could do anything. It's like, well, I'll go do this. I'll go over to Africa. I'll go because you just want to. Your heart is saying, I'll do anything spiritual.
Yeah.
Just tell me what to do. Yeah. And I was kind of like that, but then by that time, God started honing it down and to say, really I had a real passion for the down and out, indigent and things like that, and just kind of the plight of the inner city. And it was interesting because, I'm white from white rural New England, that I didn't really have a whole lot of experience with the other ethnic groups either. And it was like God just started working on that. And so it was interesting. And through that time, I had some brokenness of my own that I didn't know about. You never do until God brings it out and shows you. And so it was relational stuff. So I did not know I was having that struggle. But as I started to learn things, God started to reveal things to me too. And so that's going to be the latter part of the story. You know that.
Yeah.
So as I was going through Syracuse and I was working at the rescue mission. I started to see I needed to learn how to work with people like as a counselor. So I went to State University of New York at Oswego, New York. It's not a Christian college, but it was a master's college. And I got a master's in human service counseling, which people might say, what is that? Because you don't hear about that much. And it's because there were 3 trunks. It was, in that college, there was, school counselor, there was social work, and there was human service counseling. And I was thinking, I don't know if I want to be a social worker, because I saw social work as you just kind of connecting people with people, and that's not necessary, but that was my view. But I thought therapy sounded good because it was going to train me in everything, any kind of counseling that there was, they were going to train me in. I thought that was good. That was a good choice because I think God led that, because I learned all kinds of counseling that there was. I mean, and it was one of these where you had practical experience. So I learned all kinds of different ways to impact people. And during that time, God was, I was working with youth too. And I remember thinking, I have to teach these kids how to walk with God. And I couldn't figure out how to do that. And then I found the Navigator books that are Beginning in Christ series. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't. No.
It's like 6 sessions, and it's like, who is Jesus, who is God, who's the Holy Spirit, how do you walk with, the Christian life and all that kind of stuff. So it's basic stuff. And it's a workbook. And so I remember getting that, and somebody said, this will be really good. And I remember looking at that and saying, I don't even know this. I should do this first. So as a youth director, I was doing that, learning the chapter or 2 before as I'm teaching the kids. So it was that kind of an experience. And then, of course, the rescue mission was a Christian place too, so we had a lot of training there. So God was kind of working that. It's like I had never had discipleship before, so it's like God was kind of doing that. Yeah. So, and during that time too, when I was working at the mission, I met my wife. I tell people she and I met at the mission, and then I say we were staff. It's like, So she was coming on as a woman's discipleship director of the discipleship home. So we got together. I was doing my master's. We got married, and then we had this passion to go, and God had given us both the passion that if our parents were older and needing help, that we would go and live near them. Her parents lived in Michigan, and the only thing I knew about Michigan was there was Detroit, and her parents lived there. That's all I knew. So I went to this thing. It was I did this thing called Intermat. It's Intercristo. It was an intermatch of where you do your profile. The company does theirs. And so what happened was I did that, and I sent my letter out on Friday, and they said they wanted to have a philosophy of therapy. So I did that, and I sent it out on Friday. Monday, I got a letter from Teen Ranch, which is where I was applying in Michigan. And their philosophy of ministry was verbatim my philosophy of therapy. So I'm thinking, wow, God. And I showed it to her, and I didn't tell her. She said, did your letter come back? I mean, this is weird. And then we went, and then talk about God's direction. Then we went from having an apartment in Syracuse to giving up our apartment. We had a job, but we did not have a place to live yet. So we went over there, and I lived with a guy for a few weeks until we found a place, got there. And within 3 days, we found a house. We went to one house, another one, then we stepped on the floor of this one house and said, yep, that's the one. It just was kind of like that. So it's kind of one of these, people would say, well, how did you know? It's like, I don't know. It just kind of ran through me. Yeah. I didn't even have to see it. I just stepped on the kitchen floor and said, yep, that's the one. My wife did the same thing. So that was interesting. So we went there, started working there. I worked there as a residential counselor, which was a counselor for working with delinquent teenagers in a house. It was at that time was a teaching parent style where you had a house with 10 beds in it, and a couple that had even family that would live there. It was like their house that had 10 teenage boys in it, which was a very interesting makeup if you think about it. If any of you have ever had more than one teenage boy living in the house with you, it's kind of different. But we had delinquent boys that were living with us, so that was really interesting. So, and we not living with us, but living in the thing. So I was the residential therapist for a while, and then I worked there for about 15 years. So I ended up doing that and doing other things there too. And so as that developed, it started to really kind of take over for me. It's like I thought I could do this the rest of my life. But I was still, like I said, I was still struggling with some brokenness. At that time, we met an organization called Reconciliation Ministry that does something that's called Living Waters, which is a it's a program, a weekly program that does counseling for relational and sexual brokenness. And so we both went to that because we had our own issues. And so we went to that. Really, God changed things there. And then we started feeling motivated to bring it up north because it was down in the Detroit area or Utica area. And so so we brought up north kind of I talked to the director. He and I are good friends now, and we kind of honed it down to where it was more wide open to just general brokenness. And so then we started doing a ministry about brokenness while I was working at Teen Ranch. So there we go. So there's all that, and God had just kind of slowly been developing things. And people ask me, how did you know God wanted you to do that? I didn't. I just kind of went with, it's like, okay, well, never done that before, so might as well try that. Because every time I would change a job, it would be something new, a new population that I never ever worked with. And as I look back, I go, at that time, I was thinking, why am I doing this? I don't even know anything. I mean, I know nothing. Yeah. And as I look back, I see God was preparing me for what I've ended up doing, and now I'm retired from. And it's interesting how you don't see it until you look back and you go, wow, God did all that 50 years worth of counseling in different ways, and looking back, it's like, okay, that makes sense now. Before it didn't. And even with my own brokenness, when I went through my brokenness, I had we have 3 boys, and they grew up during the time of, we were different stages of getting working on our brokenness too. So they kind of had some of the brunt of that. Not, it wasn't terrible. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like really horrible, destructive. Our family was falling apart. I mean, our family looked okay, but it was more internal brokenness that I knew was a mess, and Barb knew was a mess. By the way, we're Barbie and Ken, so people always laugh. Her name's Barb, my name's Ken. It's like, oh, Barbie and Ken get old. So then we did that, and then God moved me. I was doing the Teen Ranch thing, and then they closed, and I started working at a place called List Psychological Services, and they are a private counseling service in the area. And so when I came on there, again, God had me do different things. I had never worked with outpatient therapy before. I had done, almost 12, I can't remember how many years at Teen Ranch, but that was residential. So I would come into a residential home. It's a milieu kind of setting, so I could kind of feel what was going on, and I could do that. Well, now I come to an outpatient thing where I see somebody in 45 minutes, and it's like, how am I supposed to figure this out? I'm supposed to diagnose them in 2 sessions. How do I diagnose them in, an hour and a half? But God started working that, and started working my heart with the fact that I was only working with teens at that time. And then at List, I started working with kids that were able to communicate, which was like 8 years old up until in their 50s. Yeah. So it was a wide variety. Then God directed me toward working with a population of people that were felons and probationers, and never worked with them before either. So here I am getting some training with that. Then later on, there was Give an Hour is a national organization that asks therapists to give a free hour of therapy to veterans and their families. So I thought, I want to do that. Growing up in the Vietnam era, never went, but I grew up in the Vietnam era. I said, okay, I'll do that. I never had very many of those. And then the Wounded Warrior Project contacted me and asked if I would come over to, I would work with them to be a civilian therapist coming to work with the veterans on their weekend encounter things that they had. So did that, and I found out, when I first went the first time, they said, well, why are you here? And everybody that came, they said, why are you here? And I said, because I'm a therapist and I don't know anything about veterans, and I just would like to know. 2 of the veterans said later, do you really want to know? And they told me, and it broke my heart. I tell you, this is breaks my heart even now. This is the thing that just took over. It's taken over ever since up to today. It just takes over because of what has happened with our veterans and them coming home and just having such a wreck. Some of them have such a wreck in their life, they don't know what to do. And it just wrecked me because I'm thinking, I've dealt with people with trauma for years and years and years and never even thought of doing that. And so it just took over my life. And so I started an organization called Warriors Hope. And not me. It's I brought back my passion and shared it with a couple of veterans I knew in Marlette, where I live. And they said, you need to create an organization. I said, why would I do that? Veterans are not going to listen to a civilian. Why would they? I don't know anything about anything. Yeah. And they said, oh, no, you need to do this. And so that's how that happened. And then I got to here. So is that what you needed me to talk about?
That's fantastic. Okay. No, thank you for sharing all that and your continued work with veterans and also just men's ministry in general. We met through Men's Encounter.
Yeah, right.
That's where we first met, and understanding kind of that grappling with how we kind of get confronted with our brokenness, when the Holy Spirit is doing His work.
The good thing about the Encounter movement, and this part. This is the most recent part. I've been involved in the Encounter movement. I can't remember, maybe a number of years. But what happened was, this is not like a regular men's retreat. This. It's not about a men's retreat. It's you go there to experience, like, Jesus, what do you want to tell me here? And I when I was working in the church before that, I ran youth men's ministries, and I did counseling with men. And so I was used to a lot of that stuff. Well, what happened was, God was able to grab my heart and say, you can let go of all the mess that you've had to hold on to as a therapist, because you have to remember this stuff when people come in. He says, you can let go of it now. And He also created, and this is where I know you and I came in, is He created a brotherhood of men who truly are committed to each other, right? I mean, you can testify to that too, that it is different than any connection I've had with other Christian men. It's like, I really truly feel like that scripture that says a friend closer than a brother. Yeah. It's like we've done that, right? Yeah. Yeah. And it's just powerful. I've never seen a ministry like that before.
Yeah. And the moment we see the Men's Encounter logo on somebody's hat or hoodie or something, it's like, when did you go?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's an instant connection.
Yeah. And that's wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey experience with that. I'd like for us to take a couple minutes and talk a little bit kind of more focused, being a therapist, someone who's worked in this realm and having experienced and participated in how you do some of that. Especially focus related for pastors. Yeah. We understand the wreck that a lot of pastors can get in. One of them could be because they just don't think therapy can help them anyways, or they shouldn't as a pastor. Right. Or for many who don't even realize, maybe they're pastoring out of their brokenness. Yeah. And they're really not pointing people to Christ. They're kind of just using their own brokenness as their own kind of compass. Would you be able to share kind of a little bit of what you've experienced and seen with pastors, kind of relating to this, and then what should pastors do, especially if they have no idea where to start?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what happens, I'll just share a little. When we came to Michigan, we started Barb and I both started having this passion of wanting to work with pastors, not work with them like therapeutically, but just to develop a friendship with our community pastor, to say, we're not just in your congregation, we just want to be a friend of yours, because we were both seeing that pastors are that group of people that you never think about need friends. I mean, real friends, not just, you're my congregant and I see you every Friday for breakfast. That's not what, we all need. Like what we talked about in Men's Encounter, we all need that kind of thing. Somebody that is not going to be surprised by how you feel or think or what goes on. Yeah. And I remember telling pastors that, and they said, one pastor said, okay, and he looked at me like,
really?
Going to do that? Yeah. You're a therapist. No, I'm not going to do that, right? But then after a while, he said, I'd like to get together with you. And I don't do... When I do that kind of thing, it's more of a just be a friend. I'm just he needs somebody to talk to. Just that has no agenda.
Yep.
And that's the hardest part because, as a pastor, even me, I was a ministry person. I was a therapist. I could not share my life with the clients I worked with.
Yep.
Just like how many pastors feel like, I'm going to tell this congregant guy, this guy that seems like a nice guy, I'm going to tell him everything.
No.
How can you do that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just in your head, you're thinking,
Yeah.
if I do that, what's my ministry going to be like?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did as a therapist. I said, how can I talk to anybody about my mess, my brokenness? Because I'm a therapist. My role as a therapist is going to be gone. I'm not going to be able to deal with that.
Yeah.
And so God started developing that. And then what we saw is that pastors... my heart breaks for pastors because I know the way the world is going now, they're being used more to how do we deal with this and how do we deal with that and how does Jesus fit with this mess that's going on.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes pastors, I see them almost like spiritual CEOs. They have so much to do that they don't really have time to sort things out sometimes. It's like if it's a mess, even for them, like, what do I do with my family? My family members are lacking.
Yeah.
Because I'm not home, or I get interrupted every time I go do something. But how do I deal with this? Because I don't have time to think about it. Because I have to go to the retreat, I have to go to this, I have to meetings and whatever. And so I just don't know. I know they've told me before that it's just, well, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. And you talk to other pastors, right? At pastoral meetings, you've gone to that, and you talk about pastoral. But does that really meet the need? Mm-hmm. Going. Even yourself in pastoral meetings.
Not always.
No.
Yeah, most of the time not.
Not in a big group,
No.
Especially.
No, yeah.
Yeah, and then sometimes you feel like you don't have time because it's just so much. There's such a need out there for what you do. And so so what I've done is I've always told pastors, I call it the backdoor ministry. It's one of these where, you can tell me you want to meet with me anywhere, any place. And I won't announce it, and it can be out of town. It can be wherever you want to go if you need to talk. Yeah. And there haven't been a lot of pastors do that, but there have been some. Mm-hmm. But I think what happens is what I find is pastors have a lot of the similar things like I do as a therapist or social workers or people like that, because it's how do I deal with my stuff and not, like you said earlier, not have it flow over into your stuff.
Yeah.
Because I got mine. You got yours. And it's hard because we can put on the face and say, I'm fine. Just like I work with military. Their big thing is, I'm fine. Yeah. And if any military person say, if a buddy tells you I'm fine, he says, what's the problem? Because I'm not fine.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the therapy, or not really therapy, I call it more friendship with pastors. I just sit down and I'll just talk to them about whatever they need to do. And my view, too, is therapy. I think people need to understand therapists have different views of things sometimes. And my view is, I'm not here to fix you. I'm kind of the guy who helps you take the puzzle of your life that's been all twisted up and backwards and you have pieces missing, you don't know what to do, is to kind of come up with an idea, what could this look like? Yeah. Or what's a different way it could look if it isn't working now? Yeah. And because God, I think, really has called us to sort things out. He wants us to sort things. And I can't tell you, but I can help you put the pieces where it goes.
Yeah.
Is that kind of
what would that like what would that look like for a pastor who this is like a new foreign concept? Because we for so many, they feel like they have to be a lone solitary island, that they're supporting themselves. Well, by the Holy Spirit, I don't need anybody's help.
Right. God will make me well.
Yeah, God will make me well. Well, I don't know if it works that way. And so what are things that pastors can do if they feel like they're that island? Some just practical steps, and even dealing with trauma that they face through hearing other people's
the secondary trauma.
The secondary trauma. We recently, you helped me working through a process of something like that, of a conversation I had with somebody, and it hit me in a weird way that, like, for a couple days I didn't know what was going on. My temper was shorter, and I was getting perturbed quicker and ticked off and everything. And then I finally well, what's going on? I don't know. Well, I need to call Ken. And then
therapist.
yeah. And then you talked for a couple minutes, and then the light started dinging on, like, oh, I'm facing something that I didn't realize I was. So what could that look like for pastors?
Okay. And that, I think, you told me the light bulb came on when I said one thing, because a lot of people don't know this, but we go through trauma experiences. Every human being has gone through some kind of a trauma experience. We may not see it that way. They have all these definitions of trauma now all over the community, but it's like if something assaults your emotions or assaults your way of life, and it's very different, your brain tries to sort out, where do I put this? Because it sorts out every piece of information that comes in from your five senses. And if that piece of information does not make sense, it doesn't connect to anything you've ever had before, it's like your brain is running around trying to figure out, where do I put this?
Yeah.
It should go somewhere, but I know where to categorize it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was telling. I remember the discussion with you is like, well, you have trauma, and you're going, right?
Yeah.
I'm telling on you, but it's like, it's like, oh my goodness, yes, I do. And it's because your brain didn't know what to do. And so as we talked about it, there are characteristics of trauma that are not, you're in bad shape, you have PTSD. It's not that.
Yeah.
But trauma makes our brain anxious and makes us, we'll get short, like you said, we'll get
defensive,
angry. Yeah. And it's because your brain is meant to balance the system, and it's trying to balance the system. But now something has gotten in the way. It's like there's this huge roadblock, or you've tripped over something. Now it's like, where did that come from? How do we? And the brain's trying to figure it out, fix it, and stuff like that. And in trauma studies, they say the best thing to do is, if you're the closest you are to the event of the trauma, and the more you can talk about it then, the less PTSD or long-term trauma there is. It's easier to deal with it because it's fresh, and your brain is, like I said, trying to sort it. So a therapist or somebody that can work with you on it, or a trauma person, can help you recategorize that. It's like, okay, we almost started doing some of that just by talking. It's okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I know where that is. Yeah. And so your brain started going, okay, I can put that somewhere now, because I know what it is. I identified it, and I know what it is. The problem is, as ministry people, we have trouble saying that because we feel like we're weak, because I have trauma. I should not have trauma. I'm the helper, right? And I'll tell you myself, I've had burnout issues that I did not know I had as a therapist. And I had troubles with secondary trauma because I was dealing with people who were felons that I had to read their initial reports that were assaulting to my own nature just because of what I was reading. I mean, the gory details of their lives. Yeah. And I did not know it until my boss one day said, "You look like you're having some secondary trauma." "No, I'm fine." And she said, "Really? You're fine, right?" It's like, oh, okay. And so what happened was, I had to start facing the fact that, I am traumatized by these things. I can't stop it. I can't, I'm doing the job, so I have to I'm keeping getting traumatized. But I finally was able to do some things where, like, a lot of the things that kept me sane, along other, which people who know me say, "Ken, really?"
Sane?
Yeah. Fairly sane.
Fairly sane, yeah.
is really being able to give it to God and just say, "God, I can't deal with this. I don't know what to do." And to have brothers that, they're not trauma specialists, but they're brothers who were able to just walk beside me and to let me be a mess. Yeah. And like, this, and all the friends that are close to me know this, that 2 years ago, my wife passed away of pancreatic cancer. It was from May to October. So that was a new experience for a trauma therapist. A therapist who's dealt with this is the inside of grief. I now am experiencing the inside of a grief process. I'm not done. It's only a year and a half. But, and so what happened was, I had friends that when this was all occurring, I just fell apart. And that's the first time that I actually had friends close enough that I could fall apart and be a blubbering idiot and not know what to say. And everybody who knows me, I could talk all day. And just to let me fall apart. And it was so healing for me, because for the first time in my life, I didn't have to be the professional. I didn't have to be the guy who had it together. I didn't have to be the guy who had the answers, because I don't. And even now, I have no answers, really. The only one I know who does is Jesus, who's the great counselor. And I will tell people, I am not I'm not a good counselor. He's a great counselor. He will give us insight, both of us insight into what to do, because I can't fix you.
Yeah.
I've come to the reality after all these years of doing therapy that I cannot fix anybody at all.
Yeah.
And if any therapist says they can, I'd like to talk to them, because I know how you fix somebody's mess, because we're all different. Our thinking is different. Our experiences are different. All we can do is really go by the direction of God's Spirit in our lives and talk. And as we talk, and I think pastors need to be able to find people, and you don't just all automatically find them. It's like you develop relationships with people that are safe. And to have safe relationships is important. And it's not, relationships are not always safe.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing all. It really kind of brings in a whole picture. One thing I've appreciated how you shared everything is that just like good preaching always points to Christ, good therapy always points to Christ in the end. And I think for a lot of pastors, maybe, I know in the kind of the background I come from, there's that aversion to therapy and psychology.
Psychology is not Christian.
Yeah, it's the vain philosophies of men, and there's no help there. But just like medicine understands there's a certain way our body works, just in psychology, there's a certain way God has created our brains to work. And so we can understand how that operates, and, we can diagnose things, but we ultimately know that healing only comes through the Lord. And so my hope is, just as I've come to that realization, is that pastors can understand, if you can find someone who is in your field, that they ultimately know that it has to go to Christ as the source, as the provision of healing, as the source of wisdom and knowledge. And for all of those things, that's the only way anything actually changes, because we can't muscle through it. We can't emotional through it. We can't push through. And something you shared with me the other day that I really appreciated, you talked about trauma gives us opportunities to build resilience, and resilience comes from hope, and hope comes from knowing that tomorrow will be different from today.
I learned that from a resilience training that was not even a Christian training. It was about working with veterans and how, how it is. I mean, pastors have heard this. It's never going to be the same. My wife is always, or my husband, or my work is, my boss is, or whatever. It's never going to change. Well, they said that the more you understand that the next day may be better, your brain is going to say, well, it's bad, and next week is bad too. But if you think about Christ, what does he say all through the scripture? There is a day. God says he's always going forward. He's the God of hope. He's the one who says there's going to be a day that this is going to be all different. There's going to be a day that you won't feel the pain. And just to me, I guess I was telling you too, as I've dealt with human nature as I have, I'm seeing two things. One is God is very, very, very aware of our broken human nature. And he is not, I don't think, terribly surprised when we do what we do, because he knows we're broken. I mean, he knew what Adam and Eve did. And, so we're as broken as anybody else. And he knows that. And that doesn't give us a reason, well, I'm broken and can just go on and do life. Yeah. But it's more like we're surprised that we're not perfect. He's not. Yeah. And so because of that, if I can just face the fact, okay, God, I'm messed up. I don't even know what it is, but I'm messed up. God is a God who speaks to us, and God is a God who knows. And I'm just more and more convinced as I go through things spiritually that God will give us insight. I mean, as pastors, as ministers, we tell people God will give you insight, pray about it and think about it. And, but the one thing that we have to be able to accept is that I am a broken human being. I mean, no matter how much of the Holy Spirit is inside of me, some people may disagree theologically with this, but to me, this is what I see. We are broken humans. We will never be perfect on this side of heaven. Yeah. And so because of that, I need to face the fact that I don't see things right, even if I feel like I'm doing great. And lately I've been feeling, pretty good. I mean, there have been things that have gone on, the accident and all that. I'm not going to talk about that. But, but we need to really be very aware of who God is. So the more I know God, the better I can handle things. And then the more I know my humanness is I can say, okay, I'm not going to be devastated by this. God, this keeps recurring. What do I do to make it stop recurring? And a therapist can help you sort through. I tell people it's almost like a chain link of experiences. You have this experience, this one, they're all connected together. Once you break one of those chains of brokenness that you have in your life, the whole chain starts to fall apart because you have to have them all together. So then your brain starts sorting it and says, well, okay, if that's not, my big thing is truth and lies. If that's not true, then what about this? Because that might not be true either. So it's like I had insecurity issues. So it's almost like, well, nobody cares. And then, no, that's not true.
Yeah. And
then it's, well, if that's not true, well, maybe this view of myself is not true too. And then all of a sudden God starts breaking down the lies. And the more we approach the truth, I tell people this too, God is a God of truth. Satan is a God of lies and deception, right? So if I'm believing lies that I think are true, the perceived truth, I call it, and then the truth hits it, all of a sudden there's light that comes onto this and we see, okay, that's not true. Once I understand that's not true, it's now in the kingdom of light. And so now you can start dealing with the lie. You can start saying, okay, I keep lying to myself. I do this. I mean, when Barb was alive, we used to do this. It's like, now, Ken, is that true? It's like, no, it's not. But then it would just break everything else. And then I could go, okay, that's right. But now she's gone. I've had to even do a new way. I have to have brothers now that I say, is this true about me? And they'll go, no, that's not Ken. It's like, okay, and that helps because it breaks the power of the deception that Satan knows our weakness. And once we have a way of breaking that lie, Satan doesn't have that control over us. So then we can see things clearer. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the importance of having people around us. We were talking about this before we recorded. The importance about having people around us that can tell us that we're wrong. And that will still keep them around. We won't get angry at them. We won't boot them out of the group. We won't, not talk to them anymore. Like people that we love and appreciate, but that are in a place to be able to say, no, you're wrong. And we need to then carefully think through, maybe I am.
And if you have people like that, they need to be able to explain to you why. Because to me, I have this lie that I'll tell myself about who I am. Like I'm dumb. I have a master's degree. And I've told people this, and you looked at me and said, really, Ken? Right? It's like, really, you're dumb, right? You have a master's degree. But it went beyond knowledge. I mean, logic. It's my emotional response to myself when I do things. And so to be able to have a brother that says, that's because of this, and you have a piece of solid truth that you can connect to it and say, this proves that that's true. Because Satan's going to say, oh, well, they're just being nice to you or whatever. Joel's just being nice because he's trying to preach you're having a bad day. Right? So the lies pile up.
Well, I definitely know I'd love to bring you on again and we can talk. I would love to talk about kind of this lies and breaking the chains of lies and brokenness, because I think there's so much for pastors that they don't, a lot of pastors, because I've been in this place where I think, oh, well, I'm supposed to be okay, so if I say I'm okay, I am fine, and my brokenness won't affect me, and then I think it won't impact how I minister. Or it won't affect my relationship with God or relationship with others. So I think there's more there I'd love to get into another time. But as we get ready to get to the end here, there's a Charles Spurgeon quote I love. He talks about living in the Bible but reading many good books, and we've been changed and transformed by the power of God through the Word of God. So, but what have been one or a couple of those other good books that you've really appreciated and enjoyed over the years?
Well, there's one, and it's a leadership book, but it just says a lot about how you see yourself and how you do things. It's called Lincoln on Leadership. I don't know what it is, but it really is talking all about Abraham Lincoln and how I love Lincoln. I think he just had a whole lot of things that I really appreciated. But it talks about how he went outside of, everybody agrees with me, in his leadership, to have people come on that would challenge him as an authority, but caused him to grow differently. And that's why he became effective in some of the things he did, because of that. And then, and then another one on youth ministry for you minister people. And I think it'd be good for not just youth ministry. There's a guy years ago that was kind of the guru of youth ministry for a while, Ron Hutchcraft. I don't know if you ever heard of that. But, well, it's an older book because I'm an older man. And one thing he said the church should not be a place where people are, it's the place for broken people where people come in and get well, but then they don't stay. He says it's almost like the old California lifeguard station out on the coast of California, where the whole view was, you could, their philosophy was you can go out as a lifeguard to go get the people out of the shipwreck, but you don't necessarily need to come back. You need to save their lives, but we're not looking at you. And the other thing is, when you do, you fix them up, but you don't give them coffee and have them sit around and talk about everything they need to go back out.
Yep.
And so that really struck me, because it's like, I don't want to have these kids. I don't want to have these people just feeling good inside, because what does that do? And that's not what Christ wants. I don't think either.
Yeah, those books will be in the show notes for this episode. People can find them on Amazon and hopefully benefit from those. So, well, Ken, thank you so much for sitting down. I know we've been able to spend some time together this weekend too, but for sitting down, sharing your story and your heart for ministry and for pastors. So thank you.
Sure. This was great. I'd love to do it again.
Awesome. I also want to thank the sponsor for the show. It's Blue Water Free Methodist Church. We're an intentional community reflecting Jesus to our world as well. I want to thank Refresh Digital Services, who produces and edits this podcast. More importantly, I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us on another episode of the Pastor's Call podcast, where our hope, our goal, and our vision is to encourage those who are interested, pursuing, or in the pastoral ministry by hearing the stories of those who've gone before. You can find our show wherever podcasts are found. Please do on whatever platform. Subscribe so you know when episodes come out every single Wednesday morning. And as well, if you can interact and leave a review or a comment on the show, that'll really help other people find and hopefully benefit from what we're trying to do here. So in the meantime, we'll see you on the next episode. Share this with your friends and family. Share it with your pastor. God bless.
See you later.